Welcome to Cozy English. Tonight we are going somewhere together. We are going to cities and small towns, to streets and parks and corner shops, to the places where people live alongside each other in the complicated, unremarkable, occasionally beautiful way that people do. We are going to neighbors who become friends and neighbors who stay strangers, to communities that form around something and communities that form around nothing in particular, to the experience of arriving somewhere new and the experience of leaving somewhere you have always known. Place is one of the things that shapes us most, and one of the things we think about least, until we leave it, or lose it, or find it, or finally understand why we needed it. As you listen tonight, let your body grow heavy, let your breath slow. You do not need to understand every word. Just let the English come, the rhythms and the sounds, the voices of these people in these places. Your mind is working even when you think it is resting. Before we begin, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. It is how we keep making content for learners around the world. If someone you know is learning English, share this with them. If you want to leave a comment in the morning, we would love to hear from you. Now, close your eyes. Here are the stories. Story 1. The New Neighbor. The woman who moved in next door arrived on a Tuesday in November with a small removal van and no help. Iris watched from her kitchen window. Not obviously, she told herself, just as someone looks up when a van arrives, which is entirely natural, and saw the woman carry boxes from the van to the house, one by one, with a steady efficiency that suggested she had done this before. The woman was perhaps 40, perhaps 45. She had short hair and wore a coat that was practical rather than fashionable. She moved without haste, without apparent frustration, without the grim expression of a person carrying boxes alone, because the people who were supposed to help had let her down. She moved like someone who had simply decided to do a thing and was doing it. Iris had lived in her house for 23 years. In that time, she had had 3 different sets of neighbors on the left and 5 on the right. The neighborhood had changed. It was more expensive now. The corner shop had become a cafe. The old families had mostly moved away as their children grew up, and the children had not come back. She did not judge this. It was simply what happened to places over time. She went out onto her front step at one point, ostensibly to put something in the recycling. The woman happened to be coming out of the house at the same time. "Hello," Iris said. "I'm Iris. I'm your neighbor." "I know," the woman said. "I'm Grace." She looked at the recycling bin and back at Iris with an expression that was not unkind. "Thank you for not offering to help." "I didn't," Iris began. "People always offer to help when you're moving alone," Grace said. "And then they carry one box and want to talk about where you've come from and why you're here, and you have to have the conversation while also carrying your belongings. It's sweet, but it's not efficient." Iris looked at her. Then she laughed. "I was going to offer when you were done," she said. "Tea?" Grace said. "Yes," Iris said. "Whenever you're ready." Grace was ready at 5 o'clock. She knocked on Iris's door with a directness that Iris found immediately refreshing. They had tea in Iris's kitchen and talked for an hour and a half, and by the end of it, Iris had learned that Grace had moved from another city, had taken a job locally, and had chosen this particular street because of the tree at the end of it, which was an enormous London plane tree that was, she said, an exceptional specimen. Iris had never particularly noticed the tree. She noticed it the next morning on her way to the station, and found that Grace was right. It was extraordinary, wide-canopied and ancient, and she had been walking past it for 23 years without once stopping to look at it properly. She thought about what else she had been walking past. Story 2. The Corner Shop. For 30 years, the corner shop on Alderton Road had been run by a man named Mr. Patel. Everybody knew Mr. Patel. This was not an exaggeration. Every person who lived within a 5-minute walk of the shop knew him, and many people who had moved away years ago still remembered him specifically when they thought of the neighborhood. He was a small, precise man who kept the shop with a rigor that bordered on the architectural. Every shelf was exactly stocked. The produce at the front was rotated daily. The magazine rack was ordered in a system that no customer had ever fully decoded, but that Mr. Patel navigated without hesitation. He knew his regulars by name and by habit. He knew who bought which newspaper and what time they usually arrived, and he had the paper ready. He knew who was a regular customer and who was passing through, and he treated both with the same courteous efficiency, though the regulars got something extra, a small acknowledgement, a question about the thing they'd mentioned last time, a memory that said, "I know you, you come here, you are part of the world of this shop." His daughter, who was 28 and worked in finance in the city, visited every Sunday. People saw her through the shop window, helping with the accounts, talking to her father while he restocked the shelves. She moved differently from him, quickly, with a kind of impatience that was the impatience of someone whose world moved faster than this one. But she always came, and she always stayed for the full afternoon, and people noticed this and found it reassuring in a way they did not fully articulate. When Mr. Patel retired, at 71, and reluctantly, the neighborhood had a response that surprised even the people having it. There was a card, signed by several hundred people, which took 3 weeks to circulate, and which contained messages that ranged from the practical, "You always had what we needed," to the oddly moving, "You made this street feel like a street." There was a small event in the shop, crowded and warm, that Mr. Patel stood at the center of, looking simultaneously pleased and overwhelmed. A young couple took over the shop. They were good, energetic, committed, full of ideas. They kept most of what Mr. Patel had built and added things of their own. But for a year or two after the handover, people still occasionally called the shop by his name. Not the shop's name, his name. "I'm just going to Mr. Patel's," they'd say, and then catch themselves, and then sometimes not bother correcting it. He had made the shop his, and in doing so had made it everyone's. That was, people agreed, the trick of it. Story 3. Moving away. When Cam left the town she had grown up in, she was 22 and in a hurry. The hurry was not unkind. It was not the hurry of someone running from something terrible, but the hurry of someone who had known for a long time that they needed to go, and had been waiting for the right moment, and had decided that 22 was it. She had a job offer. She had a plan. She loaded her car on a Saturday morning and drove away, and felt, for the first 3 hours, almost entirely good about this. The town she left had a specific smell in summer, cut grass and something from the river, and a specific light in October, low and golden and long, and a specific cast of people she had known her entire life, which was a comfort and a constraint in measures that had changed as she grew up, the constraint gradually outweighing the comfort, until leaving felt less like loss and more like relief. She called her mother every Sunday. Her mother reported on the town in the particular register of someone who has decided to maintain an ongoing record. What had changed, what had closed, what had opened, who had arrived, who had left, who was ill, who had had a child. Cam listened to these reports with an attention that surprised her. She had left the town, but she was still interested in it. in the way you are interested in a story you have stepped out of but have not entirely put down. She went back for Christmas and for summer and for the occasional weekend. The town was, on each return, slightly different and exactly the same. The particular effect that familiarity produces when you have been away just long enough for absence to have made things strange again. She was in her mid-30s when she began to think about going back. Not nostalgia. She was not a sentimental person, and she examined the thought with some suspicion. What she found, when she looked at it, was something more practical, a preference for a certain kind of life, a life with less noise and more space, and the recognition that the town she had left in a hurry had, in the years since, become the right size for the person she had become. She moved back on a Saturday in March, the same month she had left, 14 years later. She was not the same person. The town was not the same town, but she was there, and it was there, and the river still smelled the way it always had, and the October light was exactly as she remembered, and these things, which were just things, mattered in a way she no longer felt the need to defend. Story 4. The Park. There was a park in the middle of the neighborhood that everyone used and no one quite took credit for. It was not a large park, a square of grass with some paths, a few benches, a playground in one corner, some mature trees planted 50 years ago that were now the best thing about it. But it was the park, the one the neighborhood organized itself around, and it was busy in the specific way of a place that has become necessary. On weekday mornings it was dog walkers and people going through on the way to the station. On weekend mornings it was the same dog walkers and families with children who arrived early and claimed the playground, and then spread across the grass as more of them arrived. On weekend afternoons in summer, people brought blankets and set up territories of leisure. Books, speakers, picnics, children running between the territories without observing their boundaries. The benches had their regulars. This was the invisible sociology of the park, visible only if you spent enough time in it. Certain benches at certain times of day were occupied by the same people, with the consistency of an unofficial appointment. The bench near the big oak at 8:15 in the morning was two men in their 70s who had been walking their respective dogs in this park for so long that they had outlasted 3 dogs between them and would have been confused, Lily thought, to be asked if they were friends, because the category felt too formal and too recent for whatever they actually were. Lily had moved to the neighborhood a year ago. She worked from home and spent time in the park the way office workers spent time in a staff canteen, as a place to go when you needed to be somewhere that was not the place you had been. She had watched the park's sociology with the attention of someone who was still learning a new place. She had arrived knowing nobody. She knew some people now. The woman she often sat near who ran local planning sessions and who had explained, over several weeks of parallel park time, everything that was currently disputed about the neighborhood. The man with a large gray dog who always said good morning, with the sincerity of someone for whom good morning was a real sentiment, not a habit. The 2 girls who used the park after school and who had, at some point, started acknowledging Lily when they arrived, a brief wave that she found disproportionately warming. A city, Lily had come to think, was not really one thing. It was hundreds of small places embedded in each other, each with its own logic and its own people and its own way of absorbing newcomers. The park was one of those places. It had absorbed her, slowly, without ceremony, simply by being the place she kept coming back to. Story 5. Leaving the City. After 11 years, Tom left London on a Friday in July, with everything he owned in a transit van and a feeling he could not name. which turned out, several weeks later, to be relief. He had moved to London at 24 with the specific intention of being somewhere things were happening. For a long time, things had been happening. He had a career and a flat and a circle of people he saw regularly, and a series of routines that organized his weeks, and a life that, from the outside, looked like the life of someone who was doing it right. But somewhere in the 9th or 10th year, a tiredness had set in. Not tiredness in the ordinary sense, but a particular exhaustion with a particular quality. The exhaustion of constant stimulation, of choosing, always, between things, of the city's perpetual generosity with things to do that somehow left him less satisfied, not more. He had told his therapist about it, and his therapist had said, "What do you actually want?" Tom had looked out the window at the gray November street and said, "Quiet." What kind of quiet? He had thought about it, the kind where I can hear my own thoughts. The move was to a market town 2 hours northwest, where he knew no one, which was frightening in the specific way of a choice, with no guarantee attached. He had arranged to work remotely. He had found a flat above a bookshop, which was the kind of detail that would have seemed like a contrivance in a story, but that was simply what was available and what he could afford, and the bookshop was, it turned out, a good bookshop. The first month was hard. The quiet he had wanted was there, and it was more complete than he had anticipated. And the completeness had its own quality he had not expected. It revealed things. When the noise dropped away, what was underneath it was just him, and his thoughts, and the space to hear them, and some of what he heard was not comfortable. By the 3rd month, things had changed. He had found places, a cafe where he went in the mornings, a walk by the river, a library that was small and serious, and that he visited on Tuesdays. He had met people in the gradual, unforced way of a small town where you keep encountering the same faces until the faces have names and the names have stories. He went back to London occasionally to see friends. He stepped off the train at Euston and felt the noise of it, the volume, the pace, the 10,000 small decisions competing for his attention. And he took it in, and he was glad to be visiting, and he was glad also to be leaving. This was, he thought, what he had been trying to say to his therapist. Not that the city was wrong, just that it had become the wrong size for the person he was now. And the quiet had been the right size, and it had taken him 11 years to know it. Story 6. The Street Party. The street party had been organized by a woman named Jan, who had lived at number 14 for 30 years, and who had, over that time, developed strong opinions about the things that held a street together and the things that didn't. The party had been her idea. She had put a notice through every door in the street, 41 houses, and had received responses from, she had told people, enough to make it work. The day was warm, which was fortunate. Tables were brought out from houses and arranged down the middle of the road, which had been closed for the occasion after 6 weeks of negotiations with the council. There was food. Jan had organized the categories and people had signed up for them, so there were more desserts than anything else, which was how it always went, but there was enough of everything. Some people had not come. This was expected and not resented, or not very much. Some people had work or plans or had not responded to the notice for reasons of their own, and the ones who came were the ones who came. What happened over the course of the afternoon was something that Jan had seen before, at a smaller version of this event 10 years ago, and that she had been trying to recreate. The particular alchemy of people who live near each other but don't know each other, meeting in the middle of the road that connects them, and finding Gradually, over the course of shared food and awkward introductions, and the children running between the tables, that they are more connected than they thought. People exchanged numbers. People found that their children were in the same class at school. People found they were both renovating their kitchens and could share a recommendation. People found that the woman at number 32 had been a midwife and was now retired, and the couple at number 7 were expecting, and something small and good happened in the gap between them. Jan moved between it all, keeping things running, making introductions when she could, accepting thanks with a modesty that was genuine rather than performed. She had done it because she believed in it. She believed that neighborhoods were things you made, not things you found. That the community was there, latent, in the people who lived alongside each other and had not yet spoken. You just needed to give it a reason and a table and a Sunday afternoon. At 7 o'clock, when the last of the tables had been folded and the street looked like itself again, Jan stood at her front door with a cup of tea and watched the last few people go indoors. The street was quiet. The light was long and golden. She thought it had been a good afternoon, not perfect. Nothing organized by one person for 41 households could be perfect, but good. Some connections had been made that would hold. She could feel it. She went inside and washed the cups and was in bed by 9:30, which was, she had found, the correct end to a day you had put something real into. Story 7. The Long Timer. Rosie had lived in the same flat for 41 years. She had moved in at 30 with her husband when the building was newer and the neighborhood was different, and the rent was something they could manage on 2 teachers' salaries. The neighborhood had changed around her several times in several directions. Her husband had died 12 years ago. She had stayed. People asked her, sometimes, why she had never moved. She found the question difficult to answer, not because she did not have an answer, but because the answer was larger than the question seemed to expect. What she usually said was, "I know this place," which was true and not quite enough. What she knew about the place was specific and accumulated over decades. She knew which cafe made the best coffee and which one had the better seating for a rainy morning. She knew which bus driver on the 73 always waited if he saw you running. She knew the man who slept in the doorway on Merchant Street. His name was Pete, and he had been there for 5 years, and she brought him a sandwich on Fridays because she had once, 12 years ago, asked him what he would like, and he had said a sandwich, specifically a cheese and pickle one, and she had not asked again. She knew where the blackbirds nested in the garden of the house on the corner, and that they had nested in the same hedge every year for as long as she could remember. This knowledge was not remarkable, and it was not the kind of thing that appeared in any record. It lived only in her, and in the other long-timers, the ones who had been here for decades and who carried the deep history of the place the way soil carries nutrients, invisibly, essentially. The neighborhood was full of people who had arrived recently. Young people, mostly, who were energetic and full of ideas and who had no memory of what the street looked like before, or who the corner shop used to belong to, or what the building on the main road had been before it was converted. She did not resent this. They were making their own version of the place, as she had once made hers. What she hoped was that some of them would stay long enough to become long-timers themselves, that they would find, over time, the specific knowledge that comes only from staying, the knowledge that is not information, but something more like relationship, the relationship between a person and a place that forms when you have been in it long enough to be part of its story and for it to be part of yours. She put the kettle on and looked out at the garden. The hedge on the corner was the same hedge. The blackbirds would be back in spring. She would still be here. Story 8. The Community Garden. The community garden had been a car park before. This was what the sign at the entrance said, with a photograph showing the before: gray concrete, a row of parked cars, a fence, beside the after, which was where the people reading the sign were standing, raised beds full of vegetables, a row of fruit trees along the south wall, a shed, a few mismatched chairs arranged around a table that had been donated by someone. The garden had been started by a group of 6 people 5 years ago. It was now managed by a rotating committee and used by over 100 people who had individual plots or contributed to the shared beds or simply came on Saturday mornings when the work happened to dig and talk and be outside. Yusuf had joined in the 2nd year. He was not a natural gardener. He had grown up in a flat with no outdoor space and had no inherited knowledge of how things grew. He had joined because he was new to the neighborhood, and the community garden had been on a leaflet through his door, alongside a takeaway menu and a plumber's card, and it had seemed like the most likely way to meet people. He was bad at it for a long time. He killed a row of seedlings by overwatering them, which he had not known was a possible failure mode. He had assumed, in the imprecise way of the uninformed, that plants wanted as much water as possible. He planted things in the wrong season and was told, gently, by an older woman named Constance, who had the plot next to his, that timing was the whole thing. Constance had been gardening since before he was born. She shared information without condescension, which he appreciated. "You'll kill a lot of things," she told him, not unkindly. "That's how you learn what they need." He did kill a lot of things. He also grew things, slowly, imperfectly, with increasing comprehension of the relationship between soil and weather and timing and attention. He grew tomatoes in his 3rd year that were genuinely good, that he brought in a bag to work and that his colleagues ate with a surprise he found privately satisfying. The garden was the thing that made the neighborhood specific to him. Not the street, not the flat, but this place, this particular walled space on a Saturday morning with the smell of turned earth and the sound of several conversations happening at once, and Constance in the next plot telling him something he needed to know. It had given him people, which was what the leaflet had promised, and what he had not quite believed until it was true. Story 9. The High Street. The High Street had been dying, and then it wasn't, and nobody entirely agreed on why. For a decade, it had been losing shops at the rate that high streets were losing shops everywhere. A pattern of closures, empty windows, charity shops filling gaps, a general air of a place that had been bypassed by the places where things now happened. The people who lived nearby shopped elsewhere, online, at the big supermarket at the edge of town, and the high street became a place you walked through rather than a place you went to. Then, in the space of about 3 years, things changed. A bakery opened, then a bookshop, very small, run by a woman named Frances, who had been a teacher and who curated the stock with an idiosyncrasy that made the shop feel like someone's taste made physical. Then a hardware shop that was also, inexplicably and delightfully, a coffee shop. 2 things that had no obvious business being together, but that turned out to work, drawing in people who wanted screws and people who wanted espresso, and occasionally the same people wanting both. A market started on Saturdays. The market attracted people, and the people went into the shops, and the shops survived because of it. None of this had been planned by anyone. There was no regeneration scheme. There was no investment from the council, which was busy with other things. What had happened was a series of individual decisions by individual people who had looked at the high street and thought, I could do something here, and then done it, without knowing that others were making the same calculation at the same time. What resulted was not a perfect high street. It was a high street with gaps and inconsistencies and a charity shop that had been there for 15 years and was never going anywhere. But it had life in it. People went there on purpose. Children knew the bakery by name. Francis at the bookshop knew the reading preferences of several hundred local people and ordered accordingly. The woman who ran the hardware coffee shop, her name was Bex, said, when a journalist interviewed her about the high street's revival, I didn't save the high street, I just opened a shop. The street saved itself by being the kind of place that still had people in it who wanted to stay. This was, the journalist thought, probably the truest thing anyone said on the record. Story 10. 2 Cities. Amir had lived in 2 cities, and they had made him, between them, into one person. The first city was where he was born and grew up, in the north. It was a city of mills turned into apartments, and canals turned into amenities, and a particular quality of gray winter light that he would recognize anywhere, and that he associated with his mother's kitchen and the smell of cooking and the sound of the street outside on a Sunday morning. He had left at 18 for university and had not, after university, gone back. Not in any permanent sense, but he carried the first city in a particular way, the way you carry the place that made your first version of yourself. The second city was where he had lived for 20 years. It was a southern city, milder and more expensive, and it had taken him a long time to find his way inside it, to learn its logic, its geography, its particular ways of being a place. He had been an outsider for longer than he expected. The second city did not make it easy to arrive, but he had arrived, eventually, in the way that arrival happens. Not with a ceremony, but with a gradual deepening. More people known, more places familiar, more of the invisible knowledge that makes a place legible. He knew the market that was worth going to. He knew the streets that were quiet. He knew the corner of the park where the light was best in the afternoon and where you could sit for an hour and not be disturbed. He belonged to both cities, incompletely. This was something he had had to make his peace with. The fact that he was not entirely from either place. That he was a person assembled partly from the north and partly from the south, and that this assembly had produced something coherent, and not quite like anyone who had only lived in one. He had a colleague who had grown up, gone to university, and lived his whole adult life in the same city. This colleague had a quality of rootedness that Amir sometimes envied and sometimes found difficult to understand. The certainty of a person who has always known where they are from and has never been required to build it. What Amir had instead was something different, the knowledge of what it felt like to arrive, to be new, to learn a place from the outside in. He had done it once and he had done it again, and each time it had taken something from him and given something back, and he was, at 43, precisely the person that the 2 cities had made, which was the only person he knew how to be. Story 11. What she noticed. May had been a city person her whole life. Then she moved to a village with 400 people in it and learned what she had been not noticing. The move had been for her partner's work, a 2-year posting, specific and temporary, and she had approached it with the pragmatism of someone who can adapt and knows it. She had moved from a city of 3 million to a village of 400, and she had told herself this was interesting, an experience, something to learn from. What she learned in the first month was how much noise she was used to. Not unpleasant noise, just sound. the continuous ambient sound of a place where many people are doing many things. She had slept with it her whole life. She had not known it was there until it was gone, and what replaced it in the village was a quiet so complete that she woke in the first week thinking something had gone wrong. By the second month, she was sleeping better than she had in years. She also noticed light. In the city, the sky had always been partial, a portion of it visible between buildings, modified by the ambient glow of the city at night. In the village, the sky was the whole sky. She stood in the garden in the second week on a clear night and looked up and felt something that was, she realized with surprise, something like vertigo, the feeling of exposure that the full sky produced when you had been living under a partial one. What she noticed about people was the most unexpected. In the city, she had lived among many people and known few. In the village, she knew everyone by the end of the second month, not by choice but by proximity. You kept encountering the same people, and eventually the encounters accumulated into something that could be called knowing. This was not entirely comfortable. She was a private person. The city had allowed her a privacy that felt natural, and that she had not realized she was relying on. The village offered other things. A woman named Pat who appeared with vegetables from her garden. A man named George who knew where everything was, and who could fix almost anything, and who had a quality of useful knowledge that Amir thought of as almost botanical, rooted, specific, local. At 2 years they left and went back to the city. She had known they would. But she went back different, with a new fluency in quiet, a new sense of what the sky looked like when you could see all of it, and a new understanding of what a community meant when it was small enough for everyone to be in it. The city welcomed her back with its noise and its scale and its beautiful indifference. She was glad to be in it. She was also, for the first time, aware of what it cost. Story 12. The Last House on the Street. The last house on the street to be sold was number 46, and it sold to a young couple who had tried to buy 7 other houses before this one, and who walked in the front door and did not say anything for almost a minute. This was, the estate agent later said, a good sign. The house was not remarkable. It was a mid-terrace in a street of mid-terraces, 3 bedrooms, a garden that had been loved and then not loved, and was now in the middle state between the two. The kitchen needed doing. The bathroom needed doing. There was a damp patch on the ceiling of the second bedroom that had been there for long enough to have a slightly resigned quality, as if it had accepted its own permanence. But the light in the front room in the afternoon was the reason for the silence. It came through the bay window at an angle that spread across the floor in a broad, warm band, and the room was not large, and the light was, relative to the room, enormous. "That," said the woman. Her name was Cleo, pointing at the light. "Yes," said her partner. His name was Hal, who was also looking at it. They bought the house. The first year was the damp patch and the bathroom and the kitchen, done in stages, on weekends, with the particular exhaustion and satisfaction of people doing things to a house they own. Hal discovered he had opinions about tiles that he had not known he had. Cleo made decisions about color with a speed and certainty that he found remarkable and slightly alarming, and that were always, in the end, right. The garden came back. This was the thing Cleo was most proud of, the reclamation of the garden from its middle state into something that was clearly loved. She planted things that would take years to mature, which was the act of someone who intended to stay. The street accepted them in the gradual way of streets. They were known by the neighbors on either side within a month, and by the wider street within a year, and by the second year they were the couple at 46, which was a small designation and meant everything. They were somewhere. They were, specifically, here. Cleo had grown up moving. Her family had moved 7 times before she was 18. Work, rent, the various pressures that move families from place to place. She had never unpacked completely, she realized in retrospect. She had always left some part of herself in reserve, ready to go. She stood in the front room one afternoon, the light doing what it did, and felt something she needed a moment to identify. She was not ready to go. She was not in reserve. She was entirely here, in this room, with the damp patch repaired and the tiles decided and the garden growing, in the house on the street where she lived. She was, for the first time she could clearly remember, home. Story 13, The Night Bus. She had taken the night bus home so many times that she knew its rhythms the way you know the rhythms of a place you live. Who got on where, how the crowd changed after midnight, the particular quiet of 3 in the morning when there were only 4 other people on the upper deck, and each of them was in their own private world. She worked late. This was a choice she had made and did not resent. The work she did mattered to her and required long hours, and the long hours had, over time, shaped her relationship with the city at night, which was different from the city in the daytime. A different city, almost. Less crowded and more strange and more itself. On the night bus, she had overheard conversations that she thought about for years afterward. A couple arguing quietly, with the economy of 2 people who had argued often and knew the territory. A young man on the phone to his mother, speaking in a language she did not know but understanding from his voice that he was homesick. 2 women who appeared to be nurses, talking about a patient in technical terms that occasionally gave way to something more human. She was so young, one of them said, and then looked out the window. She had fallen asleep on the night bus twice and missed her stop both times. The second time she had woken up at the terminus, the last passenger, and had to wait for the bus to begin its return journey. The driver had let her stay on rather than standing in the dark. They did not speak. He drove. She sat. The city went past in reverse. She still took the night bus when she worked late, though she could afford other options now. She told herself it was habit. She thought it was also something else, a way of keeping contact with the city that was honest, that put her among people and movement and the unfiltered experience of a place, which was harder to find the more you could choose comfort over it. Story 14, The Corner Shop. Everyone on the street knew Mr. Chen, and Mr. Chen knew everyone on the street, though he was careful about what he said and to whom. He had run the corner shop for 31 years. He had bought it when the street was different. Different people, different needs, different hours of custom. The street had changed around him, and he had changed with it, in the small ways that a shop changes. The stock, the opening hours, the products he kept because regulars asked for them, and the products he stopped keeping because no one did. He knew the street the way that only shopkeepers and postmen know streets, from the outside, observationally, by pattern and habit. He knew who was ill because they stopped coming in, or because someone else started buying for them. He knew when a couple had separated because one person stopped appearing and the other started buying single portions. He knew the children on the street by their preferences, which ones chose sweets and which ones chose crisps and which ones stood in the shop for a long time unable to decide, which was its own kind of information. He did not trade in this knowledge. He kept it the way a good doctor keeps things, because knowing them was part of the job, not because they were useful leverage. People trusted him, partly because he had been there for 31 years, and partly because they had learned, without being told, that what happened in his shop stayed in his shop. When he retired, He sold the business to a young couple from elsewhere. He introduced them to the regulars. He showed them the things he knew about the street. He could not convey all of it. Some things lived in the 31 years and could not be transferred in a conversation, but he gave them what he could, and they listened carefully. And the shop continued, and the street continued, and the knowledge of the street found new holders. Story 15. The Allotment. She had been on the waiting list for 6 years when the plot finally came through, which meant she had wanted an allotment for 6 years, which was itself a form of commitment to something she had never actually done. She collected the key from the site manager on a Saturday morning in March. Her plot was at the far end of the site, which the site manager described diplomatically as having potential. What it had, more accurately, was several years of neglect in visible layers. Couch grass throughout, a section of bindweed that was not a section so much as an installation, a cold frame with a broken lid, and a row of raspberry canes that had been left to do as they liked and had taken the invitation seriously. She worked every weekend through March and April clearing. This was not fun, exactly, but it was satisfying in the way that physical effort with a visible result tends to be satisfying. The pile of cleared material grew. The area of bare earth grew. By May, she had something that could be planted. She met her neighboring plot holders gradually. On her left was a man named Frank who had had his plot for 22 years and who gardened with the unsentimental efficiency of long practice. On her right was a woman named Deepa, who was in her 2nd season and who shared cuttings and advice with the generosity of someone who had recently been helped and wanted to pass it along. The allotment community was, she found, the kind of community you read about and do not always believe exists. Genuinely neighborly, genuinely connected by the shared ground, helpful in the practical rather than the performative way. People left vegetables outside each other's sheds. They warned each other about the pigeons, which were a persistent problem. They argued about the water rota and then resolved the argument and went back to gardening. She grew things that were imperfect and tasted extraordinary. She went home on Sunday evenings with muddy hands and tired arms, and a carrier bag of something she had grown from a seed. She had been on the waiting list for 6 years. She understood now why people waited. Story 16. The Neighbor. She had lived next to him for 8 years before she learned his first name. He was Mr. Harding, as far as she knew. He was in his 60s, she thought, and he lived alone and kept to himself, which she respected because she also kept to herself and respected that in others. They passed in the communal hallway with nods and occasionally brief remarks about the weather or the bins, and that was the extent of it. In January, he was ill. She knew because the hallway told her the recycling bags sat longer than usual. The post accumulated slightly. She knocked on his door. He came to it looking diminished in the way of someone who has been in bed for several days. She asked if he needed anything from the shops. He said, after a pause, that he could do with some things and that he would make a list. She waited. He came back with a list written on the back of an envelope. She got the things on the list and left them outside his door and sent him a note through the door that said, "Hope you feel better, no need to rush with the money." He was better by February. She found an envelope through her door with the exact amount of the shopping, plus a small card that said thank you and was signed, for the first time, with his first name, which was James. After that, they talked in the hallway with slightly more ease. Not much more. She was not looking for a friend, and she did not think he was either. But there was a different quality to the nods. Something acknowledged, something known. They had occupied the same building for 8 years, and now they knew a little more about each other than before. This was, she thought, more or less how communities worked. Not dramatically, not all at once, slowly, through small acts, over years, a kind of knowing accumulated. James. She had known him for 8 years and not known his name. Now she did. Story 17. The Park in Winter. Nobody much came to the park in January, which was why she liked January in the park. She came every morning before work for 45 minutes. She walked the perimeter, which was a circuit of about a mile, and then sometimes doubled back along the inner path if she had time. She wore the same coat every day, a heavy dark green coat she had owned for 9 years, and she walked at a pace calibrated to keeping warm. The park in January was a different place from the park in July. In July it was crowded and managed, every bench occupied, every path busy, the grass worn smooth in the high-traffic areas. In January it belonged to the small population of winter park users, who were a specific type, dog walkers mostly, a few runners, the occasional person on a bench with a coffee who had the look of someone who needed air. She had become, over 3 years of morning walks, a regular. The other regulars knew her by sight if not by name. The man with the lurcher who always came from the north gate, the 2 women who power walked and talked simultaneously with impressive intensity, the older man who sat on the same bench regardless of temperature with a thermos. They did not speak much, as a general rule. The morning walk was not a social occasion for most of them, but there was a recognition, nods exchanged, a brief word about the frost or the ice on the path, the shared experience of being here, in the gray January cold, by choice. A minor community of voluntary early morning park users in winter. She found it reliable in a way she appreciated. The park was there, the regular faces were there, the circuit was the same. In a life with considerable variation, 45 minutes of sameness in the morning set things in order. Story 18. The Festival. The town had a festival every August, and the town was divided, as it always had been, between people who loved it and people who found it an imposition. She was, by temperament, in the second camp, but had been converted by experience into something more nuanced. She loved the festival for 3 of its 5 days, and found it an imposition for 2. This felt like an honest and defensible position. The festival was music, mostly, with some food stalls and craft stalls and a beer tent that was the primary gathering point for people who had come for the community more than the music. The stages were in the park, and the sound carried across the town on summer evenings, which meant everyone was at the festival, whether they wanted to be or not. What she had come to love about it was the temporary quality it gave the town. For 5 days the town was transformed. People arrived who were not from there. The streets were busier in different patterns. The cafes and pubs had queues they would not have in August otherwise. The usual social geography of the town was complicated by the arrival of several thousand strangers. And in the complication something loosened. She had met people at the festival, across the years, who she would not otherwise have met. A woman who became a friend, because they had both sat down on the same patch of grass to escape the crowd. A man who had given her his umbrella when the rain came suddenly, and had been so surprised when she tried to return it that she ended up keeping it. On the last evening, walking home through streets that were beginning to quiet down, she always felt something. The festival was ending. The town would return to itself. The brief transformation would be over. She was always, on the last evening, slightly sorry. Will. Story 19. The Library. The library had been there her whole life, which meant it had been there for 51 years, give or take the years before she could use it independently. She had learned to read in that library. Not literally, she had learned to read at home and then at school, but she had learned what reading was for in that library, which was different. What it was for, she had decided at 8, was this: you could go somewhere that was not your life. The library had changed over the years. It had been refurbished twice. The children's section had moved and then moved back. The CD collection had come and then gone. The self-service machines had arrived, which she did not particularly object to, though she missed the stamp in the back of the book. What had not changed was the fundamental thing: a building in which books were kept for anyone who came, for free, without requiring anything except that the books come back. This was, she thought when she thought about it, an extraordinary arrangement. The books were there. You came. You took them. You brought them back. The library trusted you to do this, and most people did. She still came every 3 weeks or so. She no longer needed the library the way she had needed it at 12, when it was an escape route, or at 19, when she could not afford to buy books. She came now because she had always come, and because the building knew her in the way that buildings know their regulars, and because it seemed important to support the thing by using the thing. The librarians knew her face. One of them knew her taste well enough to say, "You might like this," when she arrived, and to usually be right. This was a service she could not have got anywhere else, and she did not take it for granted. Story 20. The Street Party. The street party had been her neighbor's idea, and everyone had agreed to it, which was itself an event. Everyone on a street agreeing to anything was unusual and to be noted. The occasion was the old pear tree at the end of the street, which the council had announced would be cut down due to a root issue with the pavement. The tree had been there for as long as anyone on the street could remember, which was collectively about 120 years. It was large and slightly inconvenient, and beautiful in autumn, and home to at least one pair of nesting birds annually. It was about to be gone. The street party was both a goodbye and a mild protest. Tables came out. Food appeared in the way that food appears when people have been told there will be a gathering. Too much of it, varied, domestic. Children ran up and down the middle of the road, which had been closed for the afternoon. She had not known all her neighbors before that afternoon. She knew most by sight and some by name, and a few properly. The afternoon extended some of these acquaintances into something more. The man 3 doors down, who she had nodded at for 7 years, turned out to have been a jazz musician for 30 of them, and had a way of talking about music that she would not have encountered in the context of bins and weather. The tree was cut down the following week. There was nothing to be done about the tree. But the afternoon remained, which was not nothing. The street knew itself a little better. The man 3 doors down came to the door the following week to say she had left her recycling box out and it would be taken in the strong wind, which was a small thing and also a kindness, and was the beginning of actually knowing someone rather than merely occupying the same 100 meters. Story 21. The Market Square. She had come to the Saturday market every week for 12 years, and in 12 years the market had stayed essentially the same, and essentially everything had changed. Same stalls, mostly. The cheese stall had passed from father to son. The vegetable stall had changed hands twice, but the arrangement and the quality had stayed consistent. The bread stall she had loved most had closed 5 years ago and left a gap she had not fully replaced, though there was a new bread stall now that was different but also good. What had changed was her. She had come to the market as a person in her 30s, new to the town, buying vegetables because she needed vegetables, and talking to no one in particular. She had come back the following week, and the week after, and somewhere in the years the market had become the fixed point of her Saturday, around which everything else was organized. The stallholders knew her. Some of them had watched her through things she had not discussed with them. The difficult period in her early 40s, visible in retrospect in her face, the gradual improvement, also visible, the new lightness she carried now, that she recognized herself as something hard-won and not accidental. They hadn't said anything about any of this. They had sold her cheese and vegetables and bread, and passed the time with her in the brief and complete conversations of a regular transaction. But they had been there every Saturday, and she had been there, and in 12 years of both of them being there, a kind of knowing had accumulated that was not friendship exactly, but was its own thing, and she valued it as its own thing, and she thought they might too. Story 22. The Commute. For 11 years she had taken the same train at the same time and had learned the train the way you learn things you encounter every day, without intending to, gradually, in detail. She knew which carriage was least crowded on Tuesdays. She knew the conductor who worked Wednesdays and who said good morning to everyone who made eye contact, and the one who worked Thursdays and who did not look up from the tickets. She knew the announcements by heart, which meant she had stopped hearing them, which meant she only heard them again when they changed, which happened twice in 11 years and was disorienting both times. She knew her fellow regulars, not their names mostly, the woman who did the crossword in pen, which she respected, the man who slept from the second stop to 2 before the terminus and woke, each time, exactly on time, which seemed to her a remarkable skill. The pair of teenagers who had been doing their homework together for what she gradually realized must be their entire secondary education, growing up across the aisle from her over 5 years. She had never spoken to the teenagers. She had watched them change from children to young adults without exchanging a word with them. This was one of the things about urban commuting. You knew people and did not know them, simultaneously, and this was not strange but simply true. When she changed jobs and no longer took that train, she missed it. Not the train itself, the journey, the daily ritual of being in motion with the same people, each in their own world, the city sliding past the windows, the particular quality of that suspended time between home and work that belonged to neither. Story 23. The New Neighbor. He moved in on a Saturday in October, with a van that was slightly too large for the street, and a friend who seemed to be regretting the favor. She watched from her kitchen window, not trying to be unobtrusive about it, because watching someone move in was a reasonable thing to do, and she saw no reason to pretend otherwise. He was young, late 20s, she thought, and had the kind of practical efficiency of moving that suggested he had done it recently. She knocked on his door the following Thursday with a container of soup. This was a habit she had from her own mother, who had done the same thing whenever someone moved in on their street, on the theory that moving was exhausting and cooking was the last thing you wanted to do, and a container of soup cost little to give and meant a great deal to receive. He opened the door in the slightly startled way of someone not yet used to the sound of his own doorbell. She introduced herself. She gave him the soup. She said, "It's lentil. I hope that's all right." He said, "That's very kind. Thank you." She did not stay. She did not want to impose. She had done the thing, introduced herself, established that she was a reasonable human being next door, given him something warm, and that was enough for now. He returned the container a week later, clean, with a small packet of biscuits beside it. He said he hoped she liked this kind. She said she did. He said the soup had been very good. She said she was glad. This was the beginning. Not of a friendship, exactly. They were civil neighbors rather than friends, which suited both of them, but of a recognition, a knowing. He knew she was there. She knew he was there. The building held both of them, as buildings do, in the adjacency that turns strangers into the people who share your walls. Story 24. The Community Garden. The community garden had been established 8 years ago on a patch of ground that had previously been a car park, and its existence still surprised her sometimes. The fact that the ground had been reclaimed, that people had done this, that it had stayed. She was one of the founding members, though she would not have used that phrase herself. She was one of the people who had shown up at the first meeting, which was held in someone's living room and attended by 11 people, and who had continued to show up at subsequent meetings and then at the working days when the ground was actually being turned over and planted. The garden was now a place of considerable productivity and considerable beauty. Raised beds, a greenhouse, fruit trees along the south-facing wall, a communal area with benches where people sat and ate their lunches and talked, which had not been planned but had simply happened, because people needed somewhere to sit. What she had not expected at the first meeting was how central the social element would become. She had thought, we are creating a garden. She had not thought, we are creating a place. But the garden was a place people came to for reasons that included but went beyond gardening. People came because they were lonely, sometimes, because they needed somewhere to go that was not home or work, because they liked the people who came, because being outside and putting things into the ground did something for them that they could not entirely explain. She could not entirely explain it herself. She just knew that the garden mattered to her in a way that exceeded its practical output, and that this seemed to be true for most of the people who came, and that this was the thing the 8 years had built, alongside the fruit trees. Story 25. The Late Night City. She had worked late on a Tuesday and was walking home through the city at 11:30, and the city was different. Not a different city. The same streets, the same buildings, the same routes she walked in daylight. But 11:30 had its own version of these things. The light was different. The artificial light of street lamps and lit shop windows, which illuminated differently from daylight, creating shadows in different places, making familiar buildings unfamiliar. The people were different, fewer and more various, on individual errands that the daytime street would not have distinguished, now more visible. She had always liked cities at night, which she knew was a thing some people felt and others did not. The density of the daytime city, the noise and crowd, could be exhausting. The night city was both the same place and a relief from it. She stopped at a food stall near the market that was still open, serving to a small queue of people who had the look of people whose evenings were not yet over. She bought something warm and ate it standing up, which she would not have done at noon and which at 11:30 seemed entirely right. She walked home through streets that had the night city's particular quality, something private about the public space. The city was always public, but at night it was less performed. The people out at this hour had their actual reasons for being out, which were not the managed reasons of the daytime. She liked this. She liked being among people who were just doing what they were doing, at 11:30 on a Tuesday, without needing to seem like they were doing anything in particular. She got home. The city outside the window was still going. She made tea and listened to it settle into the small hours. Story 26. The School Run. She had done the school run every day for 6 years and had stopped noticing it as a thing until the last day, when she did it differently. The route was 10 minutes through 3 streets and across the park. She had walked it so many times in all weathers, in summer when the park was green, and in winter when it was gray, and in the wet autumn weeks when the leaves on the path were slippery and they walked carefully. She had walked it quickly when they were late, and slowly when they were not, and at every speed in between. She had had approximately 2,000 conversations along these 10 minutes, most of which she could not remember, and a few of which she remembered clearly. On the last day of primary school, she walked her daughter through the same 3 streets and across the same park, and was aware, walking it, that she was walking it for the last time as this. The route would still exist. The park would still exist. She might walk it for other reasons. But the school run, specifically, the daily ritual of this walk with this child at this stage, was ending. She did not say this. Her daughter was 11 and engaged in a long and complicated account of something that had happened at lunch and did not need her mother to announce that things were ending. But she walked it with a different kind of attention. The park in June, the roses starting on the fence near the gate, the dog they always passed on this section of the path, the particular way her daughter walked beside her, gesturing when she was making a point. She looked at all of it. She said, "It's been good, this walk." Her daughter, briefly distracted from the account, "What?" She said, "Nothing. Keep going." And she meant, "Tell me the thing about lunch. I'm listening." Story 27. The Old Pub. The pub had been there for over 100 years and had, in that time, been several different things. A coaching inn, a working man's pub, a place that declined, and then a place that was bought and renovated and carefully returned to something like itself. She had drunk in it for 20 of those 100 years, which meant she had some claim on it, but not the claim of the man who sat in the same corner every Thursday evening and who had been doing this, she gathered from the landlord, for 40-odd years. He was there when the pub was bad, and when it was good, he had stayed. What she liked about the pub was that it was still itself. The renovation had been careful enough to preserve the things worth preserving. The wooden bar, the specific arrangement of the main room, the particular smell that was old wood, and something that might have been centuries of spilled ale absorbed into the fabric of the building. The new owners had added good food and better ale and heating that worked, and had had the good sense to stop there. She came on Fridays, usually. She sat at a table and drank a glass of something, and talked to whoever she was with, or read, or did not do anything in particular. The pub permitted this. It was a place that permitted the doing of not very much, which was increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. When she moved out of the neighborhood, she went back to the pub on her last evening. She sat at the bar for an hour and had 2 glasses and talked to the landlord about nothing much. She said goodbye when she left. He said, "You know where we are." She did. She still went back, occasionally, when she was in the neighborhood. She always felt, walking in, that it was still itself, and that she was still herself in it, which was not always true of places, but was true of that pub, and which was worth something. Story 28. The Bookshop. The bookshop had no particular system, which was either its greatest flaw or its greatest asset, depending on how you felt about finding things by accident. She had been a customer for 8 years. She had stopped looking for specific books in this bookshop several years ago and had started coming here specifically for the not looking, the browsing, the experience of moving along the shelves and stopping where she stopped, because something had caught her eye in a way she hadn't planned. The owner, a man of indeterminate age who was always there and who seemed to have no other life that he was choosing over this one, had an arrangement of the stock that was not alphabetical, not by genre, but by something she had never been able to fully decode. Books that seemed to have nothing in common occupied adjacent shelves and then turned out, on reflection, to have something in common that she had not seen before she bought them both. She asked him once how he organized it. He said, "By what belongs together." She said, "How do you know what belongs together?" He thought about this and said, "You read them and then you know." This was not a system that could be replicated, scaled, or made efficient. It was the system of one person who had read an enormous number of books and who had arranged them according to a private understanding that had accumulated over many years of reading, and which manifested in shelves that rewarded the patient browser. She spent an hour in the bookshop every month or two. She always bought something. She always came out with something she had not gone in looking for. She had read things because of this bookshop that she would not have read otherwise, and she was grateful for all of them. Story 29. The Clock Tower. The clock tower had been striking the hour for 140 years, which meant that everyone in the town, for 140 years, had shaped their days around a sound they no longer heard consciously. She had lived under the clock tower, 2 streets away, close enough that the strike was clear and loud, for 20 years. In the first week she had heard every strike. By the 3rd week she had stopped hearing them, in the way that you stop hearing the sounds of the place you live. She heard them again, occasionally, when something made her pay attention, lying awake at 3 in the morning, when the town was quiet enough that the strike was the loudest thing in the world, or returning home after time away, when the familiar sounds were briefly unfamiliar. The clock striking at 6 on an October evening, when the light was low and the sound carried clearly through her open window, was one of those sounds that landed on her as if for the first time. She had a friend who was visiting once who said, on hearing the clock, "I didn't know there was a clock tower here." She said, "Yes, it's been there 140 years. Her friend said, "And you don't even hear it." She said, "I do, not always, but it comes through." This was true of many things about the place she lived. She had stopped hearing most of them, which was the effect of familiarity, and they came through when she let them. The clock tower, the birds in the park 2 streets over, the sound the market made on Saturday mornings, the background of a life in a specific place, heard intermittently when the attention was not occupied with something else. Story 30. The Dog Park. The dog park had no official name. It was marked on no sign and existed only in the local knowledge of the people who brought their dogs there, but it was the corner of the larger park that was understood to be for dogs, where the lead rule relaxed and the grass was shorter from the running. She came every morning. She had been coming for 4 years, since the dog, a lurcher named Orion, had been a puppy and had needed the running and the other dogs to burn the energy that could not be burned in a flat. The dog park had a regular population. She knew the dogs before she knew their owners, and sometimes never learned the owners' names at all, calling them by the dog's name instead. The Golden Retriever's owner, Maisie's dad, the pair with the 2 beagles. This was not impoliteness. It was the culture of the dog park, where the dogs were primary and the people secondary. She had learned things about these people over 4 years of 6:30 morning visits, that she would not have learned in any other context. The man with the border collie was going through a difficult period professionally, which emerged over several mornings without her asking, simply because he was there and she was there, and the dogs were running, and the time allowed for honesty. The woman with the dachshund had grown up 3 streets away and could tell her things about the neighborhood she didn't know, and did so willingly. This was the dog park's gift. It gathered people who would not otherwise gather, and gave them the dogs as a common ground, and the morning as a space. And in this combination, people said things and shared things that they might not have shared in a more structured context. She was glad of Orion. She was glad of the dog park. The 2 things were entangled, as the best things in a life tend to be. Story 31. The bus stop bench. The bench at the bus stop had been there longer than the bus route. This was something that the older residents knew and that most people did not. The bench having predated the bus by several decades, having originally been installed outside what was then a bakery, and having remained when the bakery became a shoe shop, and then a charity shop, and then the small grocery it currently was. She sat on it most mornings waiting for the 23, in a sequence of acquaintance that had accumulated over the years. There were 4 people who regularly waited for the 23 at this stop between 8 and past. They knew each other by face and by name, and by the things that had come out in the 10 to 15 minutes of daily waiting that was their shared window. She knew that the man who stood rather than sat had a bad back, and that the back was better in summer. She knew that the woman in the blue coat had grandchildren she visited on Thursdays, and that the grandchildren were going through stages she described with a precision that suggested intense engagement. She knew that the quiet man with the headphones removed them when the bus was late because the waiting without music was how he thought, and she had respected this enough to not try to talk to him in those headphone-off moments. The 23 came. They got on. In the evening they were in different orders and different configurations, and occasionally she saw none of them, and occasionally she saw all of them, and occasionally just one. The bench was a community of waiting. The waiting created the community. This was not nothing. This was how most communities began. Story 32. The New Cafe. A new cafe had opened on the corner, and the street had opinions about it. This was not unusual. Streets had opinions about new arrivals, particularly on corners, which were significant positions. The corner had been empty for 8 months, which was also the source of street opinion, and before that it had been a dry cleaner's that had closed, which was a loss that was still occasionally mentioned. The new cafe was called something simple, just its address, which was a number, and it was small, with 4 tables inside and 2 outside, and it sold coffee and a small selection of food that was handwritten on a board and changed daily. The people who ran it were young and clearly working very hard, which the street noticed and respected. She went on the 2nd day. The coffee was very good, which was the most important thing. The food was careful and not oversized, which was the second most important thing. She sat at one of the outside tables for an hour on a cold October morning and felt the quiet purposefulness of the place, which was the feeling of people doing something they had committed to. She went back. Other people from the street went back. By the end of the 1st month, the morning regulars were establishing themselves, which was how it worked. A new place had to acquire its regulars before it acquired its character, and the character was partly a reflection of the regulars, who were partly a reflection of the street. She hoped it would last. The street needed the corner to be occupied by something good. Something good had arrived. Story 33. The Festival Planning Committee. She had been on the festival planning committee for 5 years and had not planned to be either time. The first time had been because a friend had said, "Just come to one meeting," and she had gone to one meeting and come back the following month because there was a problem she could see how to solve, and then she had been on the committee. The committee met once a month from October through June, and more frequently in the lead up to the festival itself. It was composed of 12 people of varying temperaments and varying capacities for bureaucratic process, and the meetings ranged from efficient to extended depending on which topic came up and whose feelings were engaged by it. She had learned, on the committee, things about collective decision-making that she had not known before. She had learned that most disagreements were not actually about the thing being disagreed about. She had learned that the person who talked most was not always the person with the most useful contribution. She had learned that the best meetings were the ones where the least arguing happened, and the most had still been decided. The festival itself, when it arrived, was worth all of it. She had learned to see it not as the outcome of the committee's work, though it was that, but as a different thing, the moment when all the planning became unnecessary and the thing itself happened, and people came and were in it together, and the place where they lived became, for a weekend, a place where something was happening. She would be on the committee next year. She had said so without being asked. This was the test, she thought, of whether something was worth your time, whether you offered to continue before you were asked. Story 34, The City at Dawn. She had always preferred the city early in the morning to the city at any other time, and she pursued this preference by getting up before she needed to and walking before the city was fully itself. The city at dawn was the city before it had become the day's version of itself. The streets were quieter, the sounds were different. Delivery vans, birds, the occasional single person moving with purpose through an empty space that would later be crowded. The light was different, lower, more directional, hitting buildings at angles that the midday light didn't reach, and revealing things that became invisible later. She walked the same streets she walked at other times, and found them unfamiliar in the early light. The market street, empty of stalls, showed the width of the road she forgot about when the stalls were there. The square near the library, which at noon was full of people eating lunch, at 6 in the morning was just space. Large, quiet, the fountain running to no audience. She walked for an hour, most mornings. She saw very few other people. The ones she did see had the look of people who had chosen to be out at this hour. Runners with their focused gait, a man walking a very elderly dog very slowly, a woman coming off a night shift with the unmistakable bearing of someone who needed sleep. She did not try to make the early city mean something. She simply preferred it. She preferred the quiet and the light and the experience of having a city to herself that she knew would not last, and which, because of that, she tried to be properly inside of. By 7 it was already changing. By 8 it was fully itself. She was glad to have seen the hour before. Story 35. The Mural. The mural went up on the end wall of the building over one weekend in June, which meant that on a Friday it was a gray wall, and on a Monday it was something else. She saw it on the Monday morning, walking past, and stopped. The mural was large, the whole end of a 5-story building, and depicted the street itself, or a version of the street, the houses, the shops, the people. The figures in the mural were stylized but recognizable as the kinds of people who actually used this street, not a generic crowd but a specific one. She looked for a long time. She was not always someone who stopped for public art. Much of it passed her at a pace that her life was also moving and did not slow her. This slowed her. the thing the mural had managed, and she thought this later, thinking about why it had stopped her, was specificity without sentimentality. It depicted the street as it actually was, not as it might be, not as it had been in some better past, not as a vision. The ordinary specificity of the street at its ordinary time. The corner shop, the bus stop, the characteristic proportions of the houses. She found out later that the artist had spent 3 weeks on the street before painting it, walking it, talking to people. She had been on the street during those 3 weeks and had not noticed him. He had been looking at the street she walked through without looking. He had made her look. She walked past the mural every working day for 3 years after that. She still looked at it when she remembered to, and it was still the street, and the street was still there. And that is where we leave things tonight, in a front room, in afternoon light, in the feeling of being home. Place is something we take for granted until we lose it, leave it, or finally, truly find it. The city and the street and the park and the corner shop and the garden, these are not just geography. They are the texture of a life. They are the places where we become ourselves, where we know each other, where we are known. Thank you for spending tonight here, in these stories, in this English. Whatever city or town or village you are falling asleep in tonight, we hope it feels, in some measure, like somewhere you belong. If this channel helps your English learning, please subscribe. Tell a friend. Leave us a comment when you wake up. Every one of those things matters more than you know to a small channel like this one, and they keep us here, making more stories for more nights for you. Good night. Sleep well. We will see you next time.